Okay. Hi, we are team number 6, and we are going to tell you about the timeline of the stage 1. And I'm Frida Patron, and my team members are Jessica Robledo Torres, Daniela Calvillo Acosta, Raúl Ramírez Reyes, José Eduardo Morales y Eduardo Camarillo.
The Big Bang Theory. A Belgian priest named Georges Lemaitre first suggested the Big Bang Theory in 1920s when he theorized that the universe began from a single atom. The Big Bang is how astronomers explain the way the universe began. It is the idea that the universe began as just a single point, that expand and stretch to grow as large as it is right now. Well, the evidence is that leading explanation about how the universe began, and its simplest, it is said that the universe as we know it is started as a small singularity, then inflated over the next 13.8 billion years to the cosmos that we know today. The earliest and most direct observational evidence of validity and the theory are the expansion of the universe according to Hubble's law, discovery and measurements of the cosmic microwave background and relative abundance of light elements produced by BBN.
Chemical evolution. In the time Oprin's idea was given the name of heterotroph hypothesis of the origin of life. This was due to the fact that he displays the center of discussion of common belief that the first living organisms had been autotroph. Oprin added to and improved his book in 1938, which began to powerfully attract the attention of the rest of world scientists, these like Miller and Harold Urey. Then we have the Miller-Urey experiment. At the beginning of the decade, Harold Urey read Oprin's and excited of the idea to use the initial compounds of the reducting atmosphere of primitive Earth. With that, Stanley L. Miller, a young doctor, offered Urey to be part of the experiment. Against Urey's predictions, Miller's experiment of primitive Earth yielded surprising results. In a matter of days, the reduced components of the interior transformed into complex organic molecules in abiotic conditions or in after of living beings. In the experiment, H2O or water is placed in a system of tubes and flasks in vacuum. Then the H2O is transported as a gas. Then the gas mixture is mixed with methane and other gases, and that mixture of gases is impulsed by electrical impulses. Then that gas is condensated, and the sampling of organic compounds are located. Soon the other investigators followed the Miller-Urey type of experiment, like John Oriol, which obtained hydrocyanic acid. Thus, some natural phenomena confirm the prediction of the heterotroph theory and endorse the abiotic synthesis of experiments. So that means that not only lab experiments have been made to try to confirm this theory.
Biological evolution. The predictions of the heterotrophic theory states that the organic compound of the primeval soup must have been polymerized, and only then they could have acquired biologic activity that would enable the complexity of the structures and metabolism. Prebiotic synthesis. Miller discovered how amino acids were formed, and they were enzymes. They play an essential role in biochemical reactions since they accelerate the process. In the absence of enzymes, a lot of individual reactions will take from hundreds to thousands of years. Biologic world. In the decade of 1960, Alexander Rich, Carl Woese, Leslie Orgel, and Francis Crick, they proposed that it exists a biologic world based on RNA molecules. This theory explains the process of biologic evolution could give rise to molecules with biochemical refining and growing replication.
History of evolution. Until 18th century, the naturalists studied the animals and plants diversity, and they alleged lied to an event of living creation. This was perhaps 6,000 years ago. In this context, why they were immutable. So those who believed in divine creation were called creationists, while those who believed that didn't change were called fixists. Most of the time, these two ideals were in the same person's mind. There are 7 points of the evidence of evolution. Number 1 is that evolution exists. Number 2, that all live and extinct species come from common ancestors. Number 3, that the process occurs guided by natural selection. Number 4, that as a result of the process of natural selection, the species adapt to the changing environment. Number 5, that the continuous specialization of species to adapt to the modifications of the environments leads them to change and separate from the original groups. Number 6, that this process occurs in a slow and gradual manner as generations go. And number 7, that the action that humans perform in the process of breeding of animals and cultivation of plants presents great similarities with what happens in the evolutive process in nature. Carolus Linnaeus, who was both creationist and fixist, accepted that specific and new characteristics could appear as time went by, following sexual crossing of organisms of two different species. Georges Louis Leclerc, Count of Buffon, was the first to abandon fixism and think of true morphology. To him there was three causes by which species could change: diet, species, climate, and customs, changing their habits to adapt to a new environment. Lamarck agreed with Buffon and called this the march of nature, and that it was a progressive process. Both Buffon and Lamarck ideas were discarded due to lack of evidence. Charles Darwin also considered Lamarck and Buffon ideas true, but as more similar to the rising of variation in living beings, which he would subsequently act in nonlinear or progressive form, natural selection, an environmental mechanism external to living beings that preserve organisms that are more apt in the struggle for existence.
Now we're going with the evolution theory. This theory is presented in Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, which he published in 1859. This theory states that the species are changing over the time, and as a result of the changes, the physical and behavioral traits.
Darwin and Wallace. In 1858, Darwin received a letter from a naturalist, Alfred Wallace. This letter explained Wallace's point of view about the evolution theory that Darwin was presenting. The thoughts of both of them were similar. Wallace supposed that sometimes individuals will appear with different traits from the other ones of its species, and if these traits would be better to obtain food, they could enter in advantage competitions against individuals without changes. Now, the natural and artificial selection. In 1838, the idea of the natural selections come to Darwin's mind. First, we have natural selection, that for Darwin is based on what happened in the domestication of animals and plants was a phenomenon analogous to what in large probability must happen in nature. And the artificial selection is a method normally used by professional animal breeders and improvers in plants, by which frequently new races and varieties were established, and more races that they take as a point of origin.
Now we go with taxonomy. Well, taxonomy is the science that deals with the principles, methods, and purposes of classification for the hierarchical and systemized ordering of the groups of animal vegetables. Taxonomy is the most ancient discipline of a biological science, but this meaning is on the ancient times, but because now the taxonomy is concentrated exclusively on describing the species of living things. The main purpose of taxonomy is to order and classify biological species to form inclusive groups, always based on the peculiarities of their homologous characters. Classification of living things. Okay, the first one who created the first classification of living things was Aristotle. He ordered the species of animals into groups in enymos and enarmos. And the enymos were those who had the red blood, and the enarmos were those who hadn't red blood. But the classification of these times, or the most actual one, is this one. Say that kingdom is the Animalia one, phylum the Chordate, class Familia, order Primates, family Hominidae, genus the Homo, and species Sapiens. The 5 kingdoms, I'm going to tell you about the 5 kingdoms. The first one is Fauna or bacteria, that includes all the living beings that lack cellular nucleus and organelles. There are microscope and unicellular living beings. Some are multicellular and spore forming. Their nutrition forms are autotroph or heterotroph. Their reproductive form is strictly asexual. The next one is protista or protoptista, that are denucleated unicellular microbes, and there are also multicellular forms of life like red and brown algae. They represent varied modes of locomotion by pseudopods. Their nutritional forms are autotrophic and heterotrophic, and they present sexual and asexual reproduction. Then it's Plantae, that it's nucleated multicellular organisms, that the entire kingdoms are autotrophic, and they perform photosynthesis. Their way of life is sessile, and they present sexual reproduction and forms of asexual reproduction. The fungi includes the microscopic unicellular species such as yeast. pluricellular as mosses, and multicellular such as mushroom and fungi. They are heterotrophs. Animalia are organisms formed by nucleated cells that are heterotrophs, are multicellular, and have sensitive, irritable, and reactive, and presents mostly sexual reproduction. That was all for our timeline. Thank you so much.